everybody, and welcome to another Big 30 football edition of OTH Sports View. I'm JP Butler, alongside the A-Team, Sean Campbell and Sam Wilson. We said during last week's episode that this next week was going to be probably the biggest week in the Big 30, maybe all year, this past weekend's games, given that you had two undefeated teams playing in Franklinville, Ellicottville, and Maple Grove. You had two undefeated teams playing in CubaRushford and Letchworth, Warsaw, and the big game here in Olean at Bradner Stadium between Olean and Pioneer, just the magnitude of that game. Sean, you did that game, as you've done Olean throughout the year, and I have to say, I was in the office and following along on Twitter and saw that your tweet going into the fourth quarter, that was a 27-7 Olean high lead. It looked like they, were kind of cruising to a pretty easy victory.
Looked like it.
And then the next time I refresh my timeline, the game's in overtime. And not only is it in overtime, but Olean High's actually down with, Pioneer scoring first and then getting the ball back. What happened in that game, and how was Olean ultimately able to pull it off to improve to 5-0, and really out of the New York teams, they were the only team to come out of that big weekend unscathed?
Well, Pioneer just goes on this 20-0 run in the fourth quarter. It takes them about 9 minutes to score. They get their ground game going, led by Todd Thompson. And Olean's offense just kind of starts stalling. I think in the second half, the only touchdown they scored was Garrett Bolt's punt return after Pioneer went 3-and-out on its first possession after halftime. And they had 5 possessions in the second half, a punt, 2 turnovers on downs, a fumble, and an interception. Just things started not really going their way, and Pioneer just really caught a hold of the momentum, pushed the game into overtime. Neither team scored in the first overtime period. Okay. And then Olean, Pioneer gets the ball first in the second overtime, scores rather quickly on a Thompson touchdown. Then Olean finds itself down needing to score to either extend the game, go for the win. Garrett Bolt throws a touchdown pass to Joe Jadrasco. Mm-hmm. Phil Vecchio calls a timeout. Everybody in the stadium's kind of wondering, what's he thinking here? And he sends out the offense. They line up to go for the win, and Garrett Bolt just rolls left and dives across the goal line. I compared it to Jim Kelly in 1989 going for the touchdown in the win against Miami. It was just a very similar looking play, and bench storms out onto the field. A huge student section follows. It's just really bad.
Just an amazing game, and it's just interesting to me. First-year coach Phil Vecchio making that kind of a decision, such a huge decision, having it pay off, but just the moxie, I guess, to make that call. But specifically with Bolt, who was the one who went in for the 2-point conversion, that obviously wasn't the only thing he did in that game. He had a huge game, as you said in your story. He had a hand in all 5 touchdowns they scored. He had 303 all-purpose yards. He had the punt return for a touchdown, a kickoff return for a touchdown, and ran one in, I believe. Yep. How big was he for the Huskies on Friday?
He was huge. This was really the Garrett Bolt show on full display. And even 2 of their touchdown drives that they had in the first half, he had big punt returns to set them up deep in Pioneer territory. The thing with them is they never really had a long scoring drive all night. So, if Garrett Bolt doesn't have a couple of big punt returns to set them up well, a kickoff return for a touchdown, punt return for a touchdown, who knows what happens in this game.
Right. And, here Olean is now. We weren't sure. I don't think anybody knew what to expect going into this year. This is a program that has had some struggles in recent years, and now they have a new coach. But here they are, 5-0 with some big wins. That was their first win over Pioneer since 2009, if I'm not mistaken. What does this mean win for Olean High with 2 weeks left in the regular season?
Already going to the playoffs for the first time in 5 years, second time in 12 years. Already clinched a division title for the first time since 2004 with 2 games to play, which is really incredible to think that. And just the way they've been able to win these games too. They've been down at halftime twice, albeit narrowly, won those. They've been outgained significantly in 3 of these games. And just the other night, Pioneer catches the momentum, ties the game with 1.5 minutes left, and then has a chance to kick an extra point to go ahead. They miss the extra point.
That's amazing.
And then Olean gets the ball back, fumbles on the second play, and Pioneer gets another chance to go for a win and tries a 41-yard field goal at the horn, and it falls short.
Wow.
So, I mean, just to escape that game with a win, I mean, very fortunate, but it's kind of what they've been doing.
And they've been able to escape. They moved to 5-0, and now really with probably a chance anyway to finish the regular season undefeated. Certainly something that I don't think anybody, even the biggest optimist, would have thought, but that's on the table. Sam, you had one of the other big games. We've talked about that triumvirate of New York teams. Yep. You've done a lot of Franklinville, Ellicottville. Mm-hmm. This is a team that looks so good over the first 4 weeks. They were at the top of that Class D division. Real tough game against Maple Grove on Friday, and right off the bat, not a good start. They give up the opening kickoff
about 95 yards
for a touchdown. They only really, I think, pulled to within 10 at any other point in the game, but end up losing the game 43 to 12. How does a team like Franklinville-Ellicottville that had been so good and been doing that to other teams kind of take it on the chin by the Red Dragons?
Well, clearly they played some pretty good teams, some interesting teams like Frewsburg and Randolph. They had to come back in both of those games. But they had not played a team like Maple Grove yet. Number one team in the state. They've had so much success for a long time, whether they're with Chautauqua Lake playing in a higher division like they had been the last couple of years. But this is just a juggernaut Maple Grove team. From what I saw, they're not imposing in terms of their size. It's not like their line just runs over you, but they are just so fast, and they just execute it at a higher level than any team Franklinville-Ellicottville had seen so far by a lot, I think. And when you're playing a team like that, you can't make mistakes, and that means you can't give up the opening kickoff for touchdown. You can't have a couple turnovers, which they had. And you mentioned they get it down to 10 points, which is really in the last couple minutes there in the first half, about minute 30 to go. And that makes it 22-12. They're down, and then you're thinking, okay, they can build on this in the second half. They get the ball out at halftime, but it doesn't go that way. They give up another touchdown, a quick 6-play, about 60-yard drive
like
to put it. That, I think, if you're being realistic, that kind of put it away. And then in the second half was obviously disappointing that they weren't able to put any points on the board. They would move the ball They moved the ball fairly well. It's not like they were getting smothered at the line of scrimmage or anything, but they couldn't convert when they got it in close or even relatively close. They had a drive that stopped with the turnover in that third quarter there. It was just not their best game, and they played the best team they're probably going to play all
season. When you put those two things together, that's probably where you have such a deficit.
Exactly.
And so now Franklinville-Ellicottville, who itself had looked so unbeatable at times, now they're in a position really where they've got to do some regrouping here going forward over the last 2 weeks. What does that loss do to Franklinville-Ellicottville, and what are they looking at here going forward?
Well, right now they're third in the division, and I think they're pretty comfortably in that top three with the other two still unbeaten, Silver Creek and Maple Grove, who are going to play this week. So you could have one of those. Obviously, one of those teams is going to get their first loss and drop down to second, and then Franklinville-Ellicottville closes the year against Silver Creek. So they have a chance to climb up at least to that second spot, get themselves home field for the rest of the Section 6 playoffs until the Ralph, if they were to get their new era, whatever it's called now.
Right.
But I think they're obviously in that top three. They can determine where they end up in that ranking over the last 2 weeks here.
Right, and we know that Coach Chad Bartosik said after that game that they did get beat, pretty handily, although he didn't think they were that much scoreboard better than Frankville, which I thought was an interesting quote. So now we'll see how much better the Titans are able to get over these next couple of weeks to see if maybe they can challenge a team like Maple Grove in a potential rematch and to see what they do against Silver Creek.
Yeah, but I think for now, it's pretty safe to say they're not going to see Maple Grove until the finals if they're lucky enough to get that far. I think they have to focus on beating Portville. Don't get surprised this week. That's a team they lost to a year ago, and then you got to take care of business against Silver Creek, possibly twice here to enable it, in order for yourselves to be able to get to the sectional final.
We had 2 other games involving all undefeated teams. CubaRushford, that's a team we've talked about on here. We thought that their game 2 weeks ago against Avon was going to be their biggest of the year. Avon was the regular season champion last year and handed CubaRushford its only loss. CubaRushford wins that game, and so we're thinking, okay, they might have a clear path here the regular season. But it turns out Letchworth Warsaw is the team that's really kind of set itself apart. So they end up handling Avon. So you see that and you're thinking, okay, how's this game going to go with CubaRushford this weekend? Well, Letchworth Warsaw actually slowed down CubaRushford's high-powered offense entirely. They shut them out. They win the game 17-0, and it was actually, we talked about before going on here, a kicker who made a pretty big difference in that game.
Yeah, 3 touchdown early, then kicks 3 field goals, and that's really the difference.
And so it was an interesting thing. The scoring was a touchdown and a 2-point conversion and 3 field goals. And they got 1 in each quarter, and they were able to slow down CubaRushford running back Trevor Smith, who'd been just putting up video game numbers for the Rebels.
I don't think anyone could have guessed that CubaRushford wouldn't score. I mean, 49 points per game in their first 4 games, but that just speaks to how good Letchworth Warsaw really is, a Class C school.
Right.
And I think that's really a pretty big difference.
Right. And so CubaRushford and Franklin-Bellicaville both with, coming off losses here, still, hoping for high finishes in their league. We'll see what they do. And then the other one was south of the Big 30 border, Kane and Elk County Catholic. Kane has been the #1 team in our large school poll all season long. They probably will be by tomorrow morning, taking on unbeaten ECC. It's a close game, really, at halftime. I think it was maybe a 1-possession game at halftime, and then Kane is able to pull away in the second half for a 32-13 victory. So that leaves us with just 2 unbeatens now, with 2 weeks remaining. In that game, in the Kane game, 2 kids, 2 names that we've seen a lot of this year were the biggest difference makers, and we even saw in the story that the 2 kids, Eric DeLong, the running back, and Reed Williams, the quarterback, like to go into games kind of pushing each other to see who can have the bigger game. Both of those players, probably one of the 2 anyway, will be in the conversation a couple of weeks from now for Big 30 Player of the Year status. That's on the Pennsylvania side. On the New York side, who are we looking at, in your view, as somebody who might be in that conversation?
I think, obviously, there's Trevor Smith from CubaRushford, just being a touchdown machine. You have to be in the conversation,
Right.
putting up those kinds of numbers.
He's up to, I think, 20 total touchdowns already.
So he's definitely there. Olean High, undefeated. Has Garrett Bolt, who really saw what he can do this past weekend. Dylan Vincent, running back and linebacker, has had some very big games too. He's a very good defender as well and has run the ball well in quite a few games too. So he's definitely in the conversation, I would say.
Right, and Sam, a kid you've seen a lot of, a kid we've talked about here a lot is Brock Leach at Franklin-Bellicaville.
Yeah, he was already an impact player last year before becoming a starting quarterback. He was an excellent linebacker last year, some downs at running back, but this year he's really become the heart and soul of that team, particularly on offense. That Randolph game a week ago, he had all but a handful of their yards between passing and rushing. Obviously, he didn't have as much success this week against Maple Grove. They really took away his ability to run, and he made some plays out of the pocket. But he's been by far the biggest reason for their offensive success.
He's the only guy. And all 3 of those teams, again, with important games this week. Olean looking to keep the undefeated season alive at East Aurora Holland. CubaRushford, and a rare, pretty important all Big 30 matchup taking on Bolivar-Richburg, which has surprised. We haven't talked about that. Bolivar-Richburg out to a 4-1 start, their best season in years. And Franklinville-Ellicottville, we talked about against Portville. Portville has struggled, but as you said, that was their one regular season loss last year. I did that game. That was a surprising finish. And so all three teams, all three of those New York teams we talk about with big games, will be back next week to see how they did. And for this week, thank you for watching.